To everybody who has joined us today. We do thank you for your time. We are here to discuss future-proofing your workforce, and it's a webinar that has garnered a lot of interest. So we will be sharing, we will be recording the session and sharing it afterwards for those who are unable to get on because of the limits to the webinar software. But first and foremost, I would like to introduce you to our very special guest today. Annabelle Rees is a qualified psychologist who has worked both clinically and corporately. Across a variety of HR, OD and operations general management roles. She more recently established her own business whereby providing end-to-end business management advice. And we're very grateful for Annabelle for giving up some of her time and sharing her insights today to help us future-proof our workforces. So from an agenda perspective, I will quickly take you through the current landscape and the business impacts of COVID-19, and then leveraging from Annabelle's expertise, we will be drilling into insights and tools to in fact future-proof your workforce, some early identification techniques and some strategies to optimise business performance. There will be we've prepared content for about 30 minutes. We know that you are all very busy, so we wanted to make it timely and hopefully to coincide with your lunch breaks. But we will obviously also open up for questions at the end. And any questions that we're not able to get to, we would be happy to prepare some responses and share it with the attendees as well. So please note down your questions as you go along. We've got visibility of the questions that come through, and we will pause for that time at the end to go through some of those questions. As I said up front, we will be recording today's session, so hopefully you're all comfortable with that. So to start today, I'd like you to cast your mind back 5 months. And yes, in fact, that's all it's been is 5 months for our pre-COVID world. Back then it was estimated that 10% of the workforce, less than 10%, worked remotely. And according to a Forbes study in 2019, the majority of those did so for the benefits of better work-life balance, improved productivity, to avoid commuting and to reduce stress. While some organisations were embracing flexible work arrangements, others were still in the state of presenteeism, effectively, of having to actually come into the workplace. Measurement of performance was still more closely aligned to presence in the workplace than delivery of outcomes, and a day was predictable and controllable for both the employee and the organisation. Then came along the extravagant global experiment imposed on everyone, forcing plans for remote work to be invented or fast-tracked for survival. It's estimated 2.6 billion people around the world were in some kind of lockdown. In other words, that's 4 in every 5. Many organisations like the Canadian government, who became popular on social media, adopted an empathetic, supportive approach to the pandemic. As someone who's worked from home for a number of years, I can categorically concur that this was not just working from home as we knew it. This was surviving, but it forced people to consider what they wanted or what they needed out of their work arrangements. If you refer to the graph on the right, people relished saving commuting time. They added in exercise and they still found ways to be productive, perhaps even more so in some circumstances. Most employees relished this freedom and found ways to deliver through these challenging times. They were able to achieve work demands while experiencing the work-life benefits they previously aspired to. Some have cynically suggested this is because there were no competing interests. You didn't want to head to the beach on a sunny day or nip down to the local coffee shop with a buddy. I prefer to believe that the opposite is true and that people have acknowledged that with flexibility comes accountability, that they've found routines that enabled them to deliver to their task. And the downside was that the personal drain of trying to be all things to all people all of the time, and the challenges of maintaining that work-life balance, the boundaries and dealing with digital exhaustion. So if we look at the transition to recovery, and we talk about this in the white paper, the infographics that you can find are inadequate to depict the level of variability and cyclical nature of the journey. You look at Melbourne, for example, sitting nicely in the recover phase, looking towards thriving and receiving a massive setback, placing them right back in the response phase in near full lockdown again. The impact on mental health is palpable. We talked in the white paper, Dr. Kimberly Norris is an authority on confinement and reintegration, spoke of 4 very discrete phases of that pandemic response. Phase 1 saw the confusion and the panic, with hoarding, panic buying, high levels of anxiety. It's exactly what's happening in Melbourne again now. Phase 2 was the honeymoon phase, where it felt novel to stay at home and establish some new routines and family norms, versus phase 3, where we've already seen an uptick in mental health issues as people start to feel lonely, despondent, aggravated and fatigued. This is where mood and morale reach their lowest point. And it's not until phase 4 that you start to see that excitement about life returning to normal. But for this to occur, you actually need a definite end point to the current crisis. And I think until a vaccine is actually secured, it's going to be very difficult to see that endpoint in place. So with that stated, I have a question for you all, and I'm just going to quickly pop up a poll on your screen. If you wouldn't mind responding, I'm interested to know, what was your pre-COVID working arrangement versus your post-COVID preferred working arrangement? And I'll give you a few seconds to consider that. Okay. So I can actually share those results with you now. But you can see there was obviously a large proportion of us working within the workplace, so 84%, basically 100% within the workplace, to now only 12%, 100% within the workplace. So that could no doubt be reflective of those roles that are frontline employees, and there's been no way to pivot the services. But you can certainly see that desire for moving towards more flexible work arrangements. And it's been pretty consistent with a lot of the studies I've looked at. So that 32% of people looking for an arrangement where they can have 1 or 2 days at home. And that seems to be the most popular outcome for a lot of people. Interesting here that we don't have the desire for 100% remote working. So it'll be interesting to see how things pan out. In relation to post-COVID, which we're not actually there yet, that's really what today is about. We can't predict the future, but we can certainly create it. That's a quote from Jim Collins, who I'm sure most of you have heard of, but I really love these couple of quotes, you know, from Brené Brown in particular, is that there's just no old normal, there's a new normal. It's a baseline that we just don't know what it's going to look like. The global work from home experiment has changed the way we work forever. We've adapted so that when we return, we're going to bring new skills and expectations. Organisations are going to have new expectations, and sometimes they are not going to align. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we've got. So how are organisations going to pivot into a model that's focused on delivery with an entirely changed landscape, whilst maintaining that level of empathy and support, the engagement with their team? And all of the literature is essentially talking about that manager team member trust being so critical in the success of that journey. You know, essential roles can only be done on the front line. There's some essential roles that can be done by different methods. It's been fascinating to see the technology advancements in those roles. Just the same as the non-essential roles can be done either on the front line or remotely. The landscape is eternally changed, and much of it for the better. You've seen the pictures of pollution-free sky above Beijing. You've witnessed entire industries redesign the way they work to survive. I put on my coat this morning to walk my daughter to school, and there was a $5 note in the pocket, and I thought, I can't remember the last time I actually used money. So, you know, we're actually, something that was talked about, you know, years ago in relation to becoming a cashless society is now a virtual reality. And obviously with that comes an impact on mental health. And with this in mind, you know, we know new risks have been introduced in relation to isolation, job demands not meeting expectations, reduced manager peer support, fatigue and stress on relationships and childcare, uncontrolled environmental factors, even if it's just as simple as your ergonomic setup at home. We know these factors have had an impact on mental health. There's things that you can see, these unusual behaviours and changing appearance, drop in functioning. There's things that you can hear, whether it's emotional outbursts or being quiet or withdrawn, problems with thinking or just general apathy. And then there's things that you can ask people, you know, how is your sleep? How is your appetite? Are you drinking more, eating more? How is your mental health? How can I help you? How are things at home? One of the scariest prospects was around the potential increase of domestic violence with people spending more time at home. These are all really critical factors in mental health. So on the slide that we've got up here, you will see the Safe Work Australia summary of work-related mental health conditions. Of particular note is that even pre-COVID, the data was already overrepresented by our key frontline personnel, coupled with the data from a recent study by MetLife suggesting that 44% of people feel their mental health is worse now than pre-COVID. I'd like to explore with Annabelle what, from a purely individual level, impacts we should expect to see on mental health in the coming months, and how do we mitigate these risks?
Right. Thank you, Lisa. Great introduction. Apologies right off. Obviously, my voice isn't 100%, so hopefully we'll get a good 30 minutes. And normally it's not quite this low, but 2 days ago I had no voice, so this is fabulous. Having said that, you know, this is an interesting, you know, using myself as a great example of what is the new reality. Unfortunately, you know, when I was perhaps sick and worked in the office, I wouldn't go to work on a day like today. You know, I'd be sick, I'd stay home, I'd perhaps turn the phone off. You know, the blurring of boundaries now means that either when we are a little bit sick, we're able to still work and we find ourselves, you know, only having to walk 5 meters to our office. You know, we do a little bit more, we're a little bit more accessible, and all of these things have an impact on our physical, mental continuum. But let me take you back. If we, you know, even go back 10, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, you know, I started working in, you know, mental health as a psychologist, looking at that transition between psychological health and organisational health. And I remember sort of, you know, even 10, 15 years ago, CEOs saying to me, look, it's a small problem, you know, 3-5% of our population, you know, we'll talk about it, but it's not really a focus. You know, it's not an area we really need to deal with. Fast forward, you know, even 10 years ago, all of a sudden those numbers were increasing. You know, pre-COVID, you know, only 6 months ago, as Lisa mentioned, you know, we were having real conversations and businesses were more aware than ever before of the increasing focus and awareness of the impact of mental health on organisational health, productivity, commercial outcomes, etc. I guess what the picture I'd like to paint to you, though, is even 6 months ago, we were talking about, you know, if we're thinking of a continuum, we're talking about mental illness, and that was at that point still a small proportion of our workforce. We were then talking about early intervention, and you know, that was either individuals at pre-existing mental health concerns or warning factors or workplace stressors that were potentially lead indicators of mental health or psychological injuries. What I'd like you to think about now, though, is, you know, Lisa painted the picture of what the last couple of months have been like. And whilst we've been working from home, we've also had multiple jobs. You know, I've got a 2-year-old, you know, I've had my 2-year-old home, you know, and I've, you know, had a newfound awareness and love of my daycare for the break. But, you know, with the children home, with our schooling, we've been schooling, you know, our partners and our families, you know, we love them, but we don't always like them. And that's normal, you know, and our workplaces offers give us an outlet to go to work and have that break, that separation from our family, you know, to be able to talk about something else, to go out for lunch and socialize, you know, with our work colleagues, to go for a walk to and from the office, have that physical indication. You know, what we're talking about is not just working from home in the last couple of months. It's been able to, you know, it's the lack of exercise because we're literally working within 5 meters of perhaps where we're living. You know, we're literally switching on and off from daycare and childcare. Even though our kids are starting to go back to school, you know, we're still far more actively involved in our schooling and our children. Our partners and our relationships are in our face literally far more than ever before. And even the best of relationships are finding that that's having an impact just on us time. You know, I've got a partner that loves having time to themselves, and, you know, even those that like to socialize and connect with friends to get our energy, all of those things just aren't as available because of the time squeeze. So, you know, whereas previously I might have been talking to business leaders about managing mental illness, which was a small component, managing our preventative of health issues, psychological issues, high stress environments, high stress projects. You know, for the most part, I'd actually challenge you to say, you know, all of us, you know, even those that were right up the other end of the spectrum, that were doing very well, that generally have very high functioning mental and physical health, are also starting to feel a little bit of psychological fatigue. And that's a very slippery slope. You know, that doesn't mean that all of us are going to end up with psychological illness, but psychological health and being on top of that on a regular basis has a fundamental impact on commercial outcomes. You know, we all think about, so, you know, I'm sitting here today, my voice is not 100%. You know, if I was sitting at an 8-hour day working, I can guarantee my productivity is not going to be the same as if I was feeling 100%. I'm more likely to stay in front of the computer. You know, hands up for all of those who have been more Zoom calls, team calls, on meetings, co-meetings, whatever, video meetings more than ever before, potentially more than we really need to. So not only are we connected more than ever, but we're needing to be visually present more than ever. You know, so again, you know, there's a lot of energy that it takes to be visually present on a video call and connecting in office meetings. It's very different to when you're on a phone call. You can be relaxed and you can be slightly less engaged in terms of your energy levels, and you can do more restorative physical, psychological activities. So keeping all of those in mind, I guess I put together the next slide is just a little sort of reminder of top 10 ways that, you know, if we can focus on ourselves and how can we impact this into our organisation, to being realistic and mitigating potential risks for our mental health. And like I said, number one is be realistic. I think, you know, what we've learned more and more over the last couple of months is we try to do too much. You know, I've spoken to parents and non-parents. I've spoken to the elderly, the young, in a million different, you know, single relationships or otherwise. Everyone's trying to do too much, juggling too many things. We need to be realistic, and we need to be conscious of setting boundaries of what is doable. We need to be prepared to not be perfect. And for some of that's okay. For some of us, that's not a stretch. But for others who are used to having a very high level of expectations in the workplace, not being perfect can actually add to the level of stress on a day-to-day basis. Excuse me. Having a plan, you know, being able to sit down. You know, a lot of us, when we'd go into the office, would spend the first 5 minutes planning our day, whereas when we're working remotely or digitally, we're more likely to jump straight on. and we don't plan as much. And that's where boundaries start to merge, and we can lose track of some of these things about our day. You know, often I think the aeroplane analogy is great. Put your oxygen mask on first. If you're not okay, you're not at your best to look after your team. You know, we're going to go through a little bit more about how to manage people through this, and again, you know, what are best practice in not just managing, but also looking to excel and thrive in this current environment. If you're not taking care of yourself and you're not looking at and taking awareness of your own responses, then you're not best placed to do that for others. Again, we'll talk a little bit more physical psychological connection. I don't think I need to convince anyone of that nowadays, but again, it's a reminder. You know, it's a reminder that go for a walk, create a lunch break. We are far less active than what we were a couple of months ago, so we need to put those things in place. You know, it's much easier to be accessible to the fridge and the pantry at the moment. That's not necessarily a good thing, but if you plan ahead, you can make it a good thing with stocking with more healthy snacks, etc. You know, certainly at the start of this pandemic, I saw a lot of people running really fast, you know, trying to do an 8-hour day, a 6-hour school day, you know, spending a couple of hours on hobbies and activities, and then, you know, wondering why they were exhausted within a week. You know, as Lisa alluded to, the pandemic is not going away. You know, psychologically, we'd absolutely love an endpoint that will give us something to focus through. But we do need to start to consider, and Melbourne is really in the grip of the reality of that. What is a realistic endpoint is a different type of normal, and we need to start to think about what that looks like and how do we pace ourselves for that. Find help. You know, there's a million resources that are available to us, whether that's online, whether that's leveraging our connections, social connections, even though you're not going to office or having a coffee as often as possible, make sure you're still connecting socially, using telehealth options and looking at ways to you know, really still stay connected and get help is vital. Check your perspective. You know, I know I've got some great friends and partner that will certainly keep me in check and you know, have the hard conversations if I need to. You know, they're the ones that we need, that if we start trying to do too much or we think we're, you know, we're okay when we're really not, you know, listen and take on board your perspective from other people. Finally, slippery slope. Again, you know, we're talking about, you know, part of our population that were generally very high functioning and productive, now starting to exhibit areas of mental health and psychological injury that they've never experienced before. You know, this will be new to them. This is slippery slope between having a hiccup and having some minor stress or psychological challenges versus finding themselves in a really deep hole because they haven't been exposed to that type of psychological illness before. And also, this too will pass. You know, I think whilst we don't know what an end looks like, I don't think we need to be, you know, it's realistic to think it's not going to be like this forever. So, you know, being realistic about what that might look like and not being caught up too long in the drama of this current situation is really important.
Thanks, Annabelle. I think it's really helpful to understand the risks and the strategies at an individual level. It obviously helps you at a personal level, but also as an understanding from a broader cultural perspective. You know, in the context that we've already seen, you know, hundreds of workers' compensation claims come through across all our jurisdictions. Up to 2/3 of them are for mental health concerns. There's been relaxing of compensation frameworks, increasing of entitlements, manager capability is being tested in how they supervise and performance manage remotely or in the context of fragile individuals. There's still exactly the same obligations on management and your PCBUs around the provision of safe work environments, but with a whole lot less control. You know, and at the same time, you know, businesses are reporting that they're seeing better than ever attendance rates and improved productivity. But I guess the real question is, at what cost is that coming? Annabelle, I'd like to hear from you on how we can extrapolate our understanding of the risks at the individual level to better understand that impact at an organisational level.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's not a simple one, really, because, you know, just like individuals, the organisational impact is quite complex. You know, I think, you know, diagram there of individual environmental systems impact is really key. You know, when I'm talking to a CFO, I'm often talking a lot about premium impact, you know, really easy financial measures such as, you know, an increase in premiums on the back of an increase in claims, and increasing tail of, you know, management and return to work outcomes. So, you know, they're really obvious outcomes. You know, I'd really warn organisations looking too much on presenteeism and attendance as a positive, because it's not always a positive. Again, you know, case in point, you know, I'm in the office, I'm working, this isn't necessarily me at my best. So, you know, being really conscious of, you know, this is where we really want our managers to step up and being able to add context to the numbers and the metrics. But, you know, really thinking about commercial outcomes. You know, there's a lot of great case studies at the moment. You know, one I love in particular called Stage Kings that have rebranded themselves ISO Kings. You know, a business that was totally reliant on stage design and events, that went from, you know, a very successful business to zero overnight, and have reintroduced and reinvented themselves as work from home desks and other sort of work from home, you know, quick sort of solutions. You know, the business outcomes that I think are really challenges around innovation. You know, there's people now, you know, our people are our strongest asset. You know, we don't make widgets for the most part. We talk a lot about our individuals and our capability, leveraging our talent. You know, workforce planning is more important than ever before at the moment, because we're looking at, have we got people in the right place? You know, so at top down, at an exec level, what is your organizational strategy? Is it correct now? You know, it doesn't matter if you had a really great 3 or 5 year plan 6 months ago. If it's totally irrelevant now, you need to throw it out and be agile enough to adapt that. Then you need to be able to really clearly look at what is your workforce alignment to that. And sometimes that might mean moving large partitions of your workforce into different activities that are more aligned to more strategic value within the business. You know, we talk about frontline, talk about essential, non-essential workers, but there's a real opportunity for businesses at the moment to reinvent themselves, and really ask the question. You know, a good strategy question is not what should we be doing, but what should we not doing. You know, I've seen a lot of businesses come out in panic at the moment, trying to say that they can be everything to anyone, and we're working remotely. But the ones that are being really successful is where they've actually reinvented a solution that's absolutely current to the need of the current pandemic. So as a business, you know, what is the current need that your business can align to? And then let's be really commercial about how can you align your solution to deliver that. You know, fundamentally, we want our businesses to survive. You know, it is okay for our business to start to be thinking commercially, because as our businesses think commercially and look for financial benefits, the more people we are employing. You know, because again, you know, an underlying factor to some of our, you know, most common psychological stress is, what about me? You know, what's this mean for my job? Am I going to lose my job? You know, I'm realistic. My business has just halved. You know, what am I next? You know, there's restructures every second day. You know, what does that mean to me? When I'm thinking that every day, I'm not at my most productive. Whereas as a business, as we're really transparent and harness our people and say, hey, we need to reinvent ourselves. We want ideas. Let's, you know, participate. You know, your frontline often have the best ideas on how to reinvent themselves to meet the customer needs. Ask them. You know, this is more than ever before a time for you to be engaging, you know, forgetting hierarchical layers of business and engaging with your frontline. And you can do that. You know, I would recommend everything from, you know, picking up the phone, talking to your frontline workers, right through to doing surveys, you know, emailing. There's a million ways that we can connect. But with connection, engagement, asking your managers, really keeping constant, comes real commercial outcomes.
Absolutely. And it's a really interesting point that you talk about the process that an organisation goes through. Reinvent themselves is almost entirely parallel to the process the individual goes through to reinvent themselves. I did have a second poll question that I'm hoping you might assist me with. And I just need to get the right question up. So if you wouldn't mind, just having a look at your screens now, we're asking what flexible work arrangements did your organisation offer pre-COVID versus what are the organisational recovery plan goals in relation to your flexible work arrangements in the future. And I'll just give you a few seconds to go through that. Okay, results are all coming through there. It's interesting. So we're seeing, and I will just a couple more seconds and then I'll switch it off. We're seeing quite a significant shift between less than 40% flexibility to that 40 to 80% flexibility. So I'll just turn that off now and I can share the results with you. So look, previously we had almost half of our organisations sitting at less than 40% flexibility that was offered to people. And now it's more than half in that 40 to 80% range. And that's somewhat parallel with the results that we saw coming through on the individual poll as well. So I just click over here. From what I'm hearing, one of the best ways to drive organisational performance is actually targeted strategies at an individual level, which kind of makes sense that a whole is a sum of its parts. But I'm interested in how we can deploy a strategy at an individual level that accommodates for all the different circumstances and variability people find themselves in. Like, surely a one-size-fits-all approach is a bit overly simplistic. And I know it's common to use frameworks like personas to understand your workforce from a categorical perspective. And I'm just wondering if, Annabelle, in your opinion, if this is an approach you would recommend or if you have an alternate avenue to better understand your workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. It generally just depends on the size of the business. So, you know, a business under 50 individuals, I think you can get close enough and intimate enough to adapt your strategies a little bit more personally. But over 50, I think looking at models and, you know, there's a million out there. This is one that's quite fun, but using personas or, you know, looking at models to at least build a framework around how you might adapt different strategies, I think is really a useful way of putting things in place, you know, rather than absolute, you know, one size fit all. You know, we're not one size. You will generally find that you will disengage employees if you try to force a one size fits all, giving employees options, or at least showing that you have thought about how they might be reacting. And again, you know, personas such as this, you know, shows that you're thinking about their differences. You know, we all naturally look at something like this and go, oh, you know, which one am I? You know, so, you know, as a really quick example, you know, here's 5 personas. The first one, you know, we like to call the office oracle. You know, this is someone that, you know, is really likely to return to work as soon as they can. But, you know, surprisingly like to have the reduced travel. You know, they might look for a job a little bit larger than their geographical boundaries than perhaps they previously would have, because, you know, remote working is now a viable option. And they also might look at a more composite, you know, scaling down retirement planning, or, you know, consulting, you know, scaled response. So, you know, that's one sort of persona. The work from home native, you know, again, you know, they like this remote working. You know, it's great, increased networking, increased career opportunities because I've now opened doors remotely, geographically. You know, less time on the tram is a bonus for this persona. Excuse me. The newbie, you know, they might want to return, but they're going to leverage their social networks more. Excuse me. You know, these are someone that might multitask, go back to school, but they're more digital natives. You know, they're younger. The juggler, you know, someone that likes this flexibility, being able to juggle work from home, more professional development, career options. You know, they might consult and have different careers going on. Excuse me. And then the artist, you know, this might allow, you know, with less commute and more flexibility, you know, this might allow more of that side hustle concept, and you might find people more bridging into secondary careers at the same time. So, you know, I guess the key, whichever persona or framework, and depending on the size of your business, is look at ways to understand it. You know, pick a framework. None of them are perfect, but find one that works for you, and really look at delving in and understanding what your business looks like.
It's really helpful insight, Annabelle. And I'm wondering, you know, if we talk about the insights and tools, and you've gone through the personas framework as one example, I'm wondering if you can point us in the direction of any other tools that might be available to help us navigate through this next phase of the journey. I mean, I know there's so many resources available online. It's almost information overload at the moment. But I guess the one takeaway I've had is that you don't need to recreate the wheel. So yeah, interested in your thoughts on any other tools that we should be looking out for. Yeah,
look, exactly right. I wouldn't reinvent the wheel. I think there's some great thought leadership. You know, Safe Work Australia, a lot of your state regulatory bodies, absolutely. You know, Commerce WA have put out a great psychological audit tool. You know, Google is your friend. Leverage your current suppliers. You know, I know DHS have got some great resources that they can access. Internationally, I think one thing that the pandemic has been great for is about our ability to leverage international resources. You know, there's a lot of great work that comes out of Canada that I think is very similar, and you know, the Canadian workplace is very quite aligned to an Australian workplace. So, you know, I'd really leverage that. You know, I don't necessarily endorse one or the other, but I would recommend, you know, not going out and trying to reinvent, you know, your own set of standards. I think enough experts have put that time into looking at ways. Let's, you know, leverage what we've got and spend more time on tailoring it and personalising it to your workforce.
And Annabelle, I know that you have a particular passion around talking through the dimensions of wellness as a framework for organisations moving forward. I'd be interested in you sharing some of your thoughts around how this can be applied in that corporate sense.
Yeah, look, it's again, you know, I'm a big believer in, you know, when I talk to CEOs and executives that sometimes can be skeptical about the psychological connection to commercial outcomes. You know, sometimes it's actually bringing it back to about yourself and being, you know, quite specific, looking at your own personal wellness, and then connecting that to, you know, there's now, you know, 1,000 of you in your workplace. We're all not that different. You know, we've actually got a lot of similarities. So, you know, again, there's lots of frameworks, but this is a great one just to remind ourselves about the dimensions of wellness. So there is our emotional wellness, which is, you know, our need to have satisfactory and emotional relationships. Environmental wellness, you know, it's not just simply a good chair and a great desk, but when we feel satisfied in an environment, it has a direct impact on our psychological cortisol release, et cetera, et cetera. Financial is a really fundamental one at the moment. You know, so if we're financially feeling under stress, it has a significant impact on our overall wellness. Intellectual. This is one that I really challenge businesses. You know, it's easy to get stuck at the moment into your employees doing the same. You know, just go ahead, do what you got to do. You know, there's enough stuff going on. You know, they're going to get stale. So there's a real opportunity, like a Stage Kings example, to challenge your individuals with using their minds and intellectual capability to be innovative and creative, and look at ways to do things differently more than ever before. Occupation, you know, this is a great chance again for people to stretch in jobs, in roles, in expertise, and that's when we're at our best. Physical is a really obvious one, but we forget sometimes about health and sleep and food. Don't get me started on sleep. Social, you know, again, we underestimate the impact of being in the workplace and grabbing 30-minute lunch with our friends. That, you know, going and making a coffee, working in pods and being able to just call across and talk about, you know, different things. You know, I was talking to an IT supplier the other day, and they noticed that tickets were increasing their length of documents 30 to 40%. The time of tickets being closed increasing 30 to 40%. And they realised that it was purely the lack of that, you know, occupational sharing from working in the workplace, you know, and their call centre being able to help each other out with more complex solutions. So, you know, that social networking has commercial outcomes as well as, you know, being able to just feed our soul. And spiritual, you know, being conscious of that rut and having a purpose and a meaning to the day-to-day as it blurs into one at the moment.
And I guess I'd be interested from our audience today is, you know, given this framework, based on your last week, how well are you personally focusing on all of these dimensions? I'm just going to launch that poll now. I'm very interested in your responses. So I know I always find it quite confronting when I you know, think about how well I'm actually doing on the wellbeing spectrum, when I'm, you know, intending to be leading that for my team and my clients.
Hard to practice what you preach sometimes.
And the results are coming through. It's quite interesting, actually. It's you know, there's actually a number of people, maybe 1 in 5, that are saying, you know, without realising it, I'm actually doing pretty well across all those dimensions, as opposed to, yeah, at least half of us saying that's actually a pretty good reminder to focus on some more areas. But there's definitely, you know, a number of us that are running on empty and not focusing on many areas that we've spoken about. Which is, you know, where I expected some people certainly to fall. It's I guess, from my perspective, I always come back to, you know, it's one challenge to mitigate your known risks and prevent ill health, and we all academically know what we should be doing. I think it's another to actually optimise performance and provide a workplace environment for individuals to thrive. And if, you know, as I'm reading through current articles and listening to different webinars, and there's a lot of advice around different management approaches, and it really is quite consistent. However, it's about, you know, managing for results being more important than managing for attendance, which is a very big shift in framework. The need to treat your employees like the professionals they are and trust them to step up. And that trust word just comes into every article that I read. You know, there's also that theory that you can over proceduralise things, and that good employees don't need policies at all. They just want to know what really needs to get done. You know, one of the policies that I've popped up there is, you know, Jeff said there's really only 3 criteria that you need from a work from home policy. You know, you get your work done, you're available, and you over communicate. You do those 3 things and teams hum along nicely. And one of the key call outs he had was that if you can't deal with performance issue as a one-off situation. It's not a reason to add more bullet points to your work from home policy. You know, manage it, move on. Doesn't mean you have to make your policy more complex. So my question to you, Annabelle, is, we've been talking about preventing issues and identifying them early and how to manage them when they do arise. However, we know health is not merely the absence of disease, but it's the optimal physical, mental and social well-being. So given your expertise in optimising psychological connectedness to business performance, how do we extend our remedial approach to one of being more proactive?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a complex one again, and it's one that, we won't always get right. I guess, one of the key points around communicating, and, it's being real, and it's real communication. What I've seen is a real increase in, like I said, Zoom and video calls, and sometimes, that can exhibit a lack of trust, which you referenced. Too many check-ins, too many calls, too much micromanagement, doesn't exhibit trust, and you have a real chance of putting your employees offside. But also it doesn't give them the space to get work done. I think, when we're thinking of what work from home looks like, it's a combination of being connected and communicating, but it's also going back to point one, it's getting work done. And if we're on back-to-back Zoom calls or communicating what we're doing, we're not getting work done. So, I think for managers, there's a real challenge in being really clear on what getting work done means. What are the expectations, and they shouldn't be any different to their, KPIs or workplace expectations. If they are, then that's a real conversation. Understand, where that employee is. Understand what's different. Know in advance. I always say, no performance review should be a surprise. Everyone should know where they stand. Whether you do a performance review monthly, 6 monthly, or annually, it should be no surprise to both parties. So that's about having real conversations. It's about having clear expectations, and it's being flexible and nimble to adjust what those are, regardless of the environment. And sometimes that's about commercial and customer outcomes. Sometimes it's about a pandemic. It can be either of those. So I think, keeping it simple, absolutely. Being genuine. I think managers can sometimes get nervous about what they can and can't ask. And I think it's okay to even frame it that way. I've noticed that you don't seem yourself, and I don't want to intrude, but I do want to know and ask if you're okay. Being really proactive in providing your team with resources. So, there's resources that we've talked about that you can provide on intranet and otherwise, solutions like telehealth or, options that you can have available to your employees on their own time are fabulous for them to self-select. And, again, as leaders, we can remind our people that those resources are available and when they can self-select. But otherwise, it's also measuring and managing, when we do have some issues, being really early on board. These are very similar principles to pre-pandemic. It's just being tighter and being very much more conscious than ever before. And it's asking us as leaders to step up. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's asking us to step up. It's asking us to be real with our people. It's asking us to be more genuine in our two-way conversations. And it's asking us to do more. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'm cognizant of time, and we've probably stretched a little bit longer than we planned, but I have been keeping an eye on the Q&A section. So if there are any more questions to come through, please do pop them under the Q&A button, and more than happy to reference those in the next few minutes. But going back to Annabelle's response there, one of the key factors that we find in this planning phase for managing that recovery at work is around the systems that you're actually using internally. Managing people face-to-face is quite different to managing people remotely. As we've talked about for the last 45 minutes, there's been such a shift in individual requirements and organisational requirements, and we need to be flexible to accommodate those. But we also need systems and processes to support what those arrangements are. One of the things our clients are finding particularly helpful at the moment is having case management software where you can actually track those arrangements, that you do actually have a way to case note what's happening in those individual interactions and measure it over time. You know, if you agree to an action with a team member, if they're not visible, sometimes they can get lost. So having that software, having that process to be able to ensure that you are keeping on top of those arrangements and you are responding to your team's needs. Certainly our clients are finding that really, really helpful. And the other thing Annabelle's mentioned a couple of times is around telehealth. And there's a number of different ways that telehealth can be leveraged internally in your business. And obviously from a preventative health perspective, able to use some of these resources. We have a number of clients that are instituting telephysio services, for example. People working from home with inadequate setups, having sore necks, sore shoulders, being able to have an immediate consult and come away with an immediate management plan on an app, on their phone, ready to go, that they can self-manage, that benefits them not only at work but also at home. It's really, you know, killing two birds with one stone, and as far as enhancing that person's engagement, improving their physical capability, but also making them feel more engaged. An employer actually genuinely cares for them. You know, it's the same with mental ill health. You had many employees report that they're not feeling like they're supported. They don't understand what programs are in place with employers, and they don't feel confident in contacting EAP or utilising EAP to the extent that they would. So we're seeing a lot more interest in services like telepsychology to try and redress that gap as well. So they're just a couple of areas that we're seeing in talking to our client base around some of the tools that we are we are adopting and we are working with. So I would really like you to, encourage you to have a think about what we've spoken about today. And if there are any further questions, please pop them through on the Q&A now. We do have a couple more minutes before Annabelle has to buzz off. And if we don't have the opportunity to respond today, then we're more than happy to put together some resources and follow up. So we will be sending out the link to the webinar, and can certainly share some of this content with you. And very happy to continue to support you through this next phase to help you future-proof the workforce. So any final questions, please pop them through. I'll give you a couple more minutes. Annabelle, I'm very impressed your voice has held up.
So am I. And no coughing fit. It's fabulous.
And I'm hoping it looks like a positive in that there's not too many questions arising. So I'm hoping that means that we've addressed most concerns that people had coming into the session. Hopefully we've addressed the expectations you had in relation to the content that we would talk to. But as I said, we will ensure that we circle back at the end of this session, provide you with the link to the session again, and certainly welcome any further interactions in relation to questions or queries or supports that you might have in the future. But very special thank you to Annabelle for joining us, and particularly for joining us when you're not quite 100%.
Thank you for having me. No, much appreciated.
And looking forward to speaking with you all soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.